right, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Before we get any further, I just want to take a moment to thank you because we have now hit 160,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is great. Every new subscriber gives us faith that we're doing good work. Remember, the whole idea behind these conversations is to understand issues better. We're talking about Battleground Bengal. And the reason why we're talking about it is because there's more and more information and more news coming out of Bengal. And we felt that this is a good time to give you a ready reckoner or understanding of what's going on in the state so you can interpret the news that's coming out. And I'm going to give you about 10 points of information on what's going on in Bengal. And we have a great panel right now to help us understand what that information means. We have Radhika Ramaseshan. She's a senior journalist, has been tracking politics in this country for many decades. Also, senior journalist Shikha Mukherjee joins us out of Calcutta. It's an all-women's panel, guys, which is something that makes me really happy. Let me take you through what's happening in Bengal. Now, we've had a lot of news about politics-based violence. This is not new to Bengal. It's happened in the past, but it's starting to heat up again. In fact, the state president of the BJP, Dilip Ghosh, said that 120 BJP workers had been killed in Bengal, and that's a shocking number. Also, we've seen the BJP, there's buzz again about the CAA being implemented because this is something that comes into play with the elections. The elections aren't until April, May next year, 2021. But this is where we are. The TMC actually is now completing 10 years in the state. So there is a certain amount of anti-incumbency. And it's using an insider-outsider campaign, slogan, which basically Mamata Banerjee keeps saying people are coming from outside. They don't really understand Bengal, and she's referring to the BJP. The TMC has also been launching many schemes to sort of win people over, insurance, benefits directly to their home from the government, things like that. But the thing that's hurting the TMC is the number of people who are leaving it to join the BJP. Now, this started about 3 years ago when Mukul Roy, who was Mamata Banerjee's almost number 2 and key confidant in the TMC, actually quit to join the BJP. After that, we've had Subhendu Adhikari, we've had Mihir Goswami, and we understand that more are to come. More people are going to quit in this fashion, and the TMC will continue to weaken before the election. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is the fact that until now, the TMC, and it had its opposition in the left. The left has been considerably weakened. It's almost vanishing from Bengal. And that leaves a vacuum for a stronger opposition that the BJP is now occupying. The BJP, starting from 2011 to 2016 in the state elections, increased its vote share from about 4% to a little over 10%. And in the 2014 elections and national elections, it had 2 seats. And in the 2019 elections, it got 10 seats, which it sees as a victory. Also, in those years, the RSS, the VHP, and the Bajrang Dal have become very active in Bengal, and there are a lot of religious conversations about whether Durga Puja is being allowed or whether there is, every decision that Mamata Banerjee makes having to do with religion. The TMC does have a strong base right now among the minorities. Here are the questions. Will OAC come into Bengal, and what will that mean for TMC's strong base? The BJP has no CM face in the state to go up against Mamata Banerjee, but it's obvious that they will be using the Prime Minister because that's basically been what the BJP has been doing so far. And of course, in latest information, Nitish Kumar saying that he wants to contest about 75 seats in Bengal. What does all of this mean? We're going to go to our expert voices. Good evening to both of you, and thank you for giving us time. Let me start with Radhika Ramaseshan. We saw when the Bihar elections ended, almost the next day, Amit Shah started to focus on Bengal. If you could give us an idea on why Bengal is so important to the BJP from a national point of view, and how much effort is going into Bengal right now from the BJP?
Yeah, Faye, it was not just after the Bihar elections. After a pretty spectacular showing in the Lok Sabha elections, which many didn't expect. Some anticipated, of course, that BJP was going to do well in Bengal. If you notice, the BJP didn't lose a day since then. Amit Shah put his nose to the grind right thereafter. He kind of cobbled together a team. They don't have great leaders in the state, let's admit that. So he has had to mobilize leaders and functionaries from the center. But the point that I'm making is that he didn't waste a single day. He was right there on the ground setting up the booth committees. Now, Amit Shah's style is very interesting. He starts, it's like a bottoms up approach, it's not a top down, which is why they're unlikely to declare a CM candidate before the assembly elections. So he focused on spending time in constituting booth committees, complete with all the paraphernalia of Panna Pramukhs and, workers who would go and do their sampark in the villages with every household and so on. So it was not, Bihar was certainly not the tipping point. And anyway, to come back to Bihar, BJP didn't do all that well or anything. And there's a lot of hype about that. But Bengal is important. I mean, people think it's the gateway to the east. They don't really. I mean, that's become a somewhat of a cliche. Gateway to the east, gateway to the south, and so on. It is ideologically very important for the BJP to smash what it thinks is a left bastion. Now I mean it's Bengal unfortunately has become a former left bastion, but since I've been covering the BJP for decades, I know in almost every political resolution that was adopted at the National Executive and the National Council, there was always a reference to the left, a fairly detailed reference to the left, why the BJP saw the left as an ideological adversary and why it was very important to purge, all the left dominated regions of this leftist ideology. So the BJP always had a bugbear about the left, and therefore, if it does swing Bengal eventually, if it is going to definitely trumpet that as a major ideological achievement in its kitty. So it's, comparing, I mean, if the BJP does wrest Odisha from Naveen Patnaik, I don't think it's going to count that as much of a triumph as Bengal. It's not just about taking on Mamta. You know, what is the BJP attacking Mamta on? Unka घमंड तोड़ना है, arrogance. I mean, I saw one of the statements by, I think, Kailash Vijayvargiya or one of their other leaders who was involved in Bengal. So Mamta is another politician to them, formidable, all right, but they think that they can sort of challenge and eventually vanquish Mamta. Whether they do it in this election or the next election, that remains to be seen. But from the ideological standpoint, which is very important to the BJP and important to the RSS, it is important. I mean, it is vital to wipe out whatever vestige remains of the leftist ideology in Bengal. That's why, if you notice, they are very hung up on Kerala as well.
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
So it's forgive me. So Radhika ji, so what you're saying is that while it would be something that the BJP would be happy about is to knock Mamata Banerjee out of her seat, the larger attempt here is to turn Bengal into a saffron state from the left state that it has been since independence, effectively.
Absolutely, absolutely. Turn it into saffron. Now, but I mean, I mean, Shikha is of course tracking there on the ground, and she tracks it much more closely. But from this distance, it was interesting to map the BJP's trajectory in Bengal. They started with their usual Jai Shri Ram and Jai Bajrang Bali kind of slogans. Now, that didn't really appeal to the people in Bengal. It didn't make too much sense, Jai Shri Ram and Bajrang Bali. So they had to think of, tapping local icons, local cultural symbols, which I must say they did it in a pretty deft kind of fashion, identify whether it is Vivekanand or it is Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay and Vande Mataram. Amit Shah addressed a meeting last year, town hall, I mean, this year in 2020, where he spoke only about Bankim Chattopadhyay. In one of the smaller towns, it was a meeting of the intellectuals of the Bhadralok, who the BJP has been dying to penetrate. And he spoke only about, and in the end, when he talked about Vande Mataram and alleged that the Congress had deliberately ignored Vande Mataram. There was apparently cries of Vande Mataram among the audience. So he's made Bankim Chandra fashionable, I would imagine, kosher among the Bhadralok. So this is
and there's always Shyam Prasad Mukherjee as well, which is an icon that they can claim.
I mean, look, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, yes, he's one of the founders of the Jansangh. He is from Bengal, but it's only of late that the BJP has resurrected him and center staged him, so to speak. For long years, he was there. I mean, he was there along with Deen Dayal Upadhyay and other leaders and founders of the Jansangh and the BJP. But from the perspective of Bengal, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee has now become quite important. But I don't think he strikes as much of a chord among the people as, say, Bankim or Vivekanand. And these are the icons that the BJP has been tapping into and propagating in its discourse. So it's a combination of organizational skills, it's a combination of some kind of cultural consonance that it is trying to achieve. I don't know to what extent it's going to be successful. And also, trying to answer the TMC's violence. That's another important component of, I mean, we'll probably come to that later. But these are the broad elements in the BJP's approach, in the way that it's trying to fashion itself as a viable alternative in Bengal. And I think it has sort of gone 50% of the way. I don't know if it is going to culminate in a major success. I mean, that remains to be seen. And as for things like, I mean, you mentioned, leaders and functionaries from the Trinamool coming to the BJP. This is a part of the Amit Shah template. Or, I mean, it's been a part of the BJP's template for very long. Wherever it sniffs success, potential success, it tries to spirit away important people from the opposition. It did it in UP a long time ago. It's been doing it in Gujarat. It's done it in the other states. But nobody thought that it would be able to do it in Bengal, make inroads into the Trinamool and actually spirit away important leaders. It started with Mukul. Everybody thought Mukul Roy was a one-off thing. Obviously not. I mean, now others are kind of joining in. They're coming to the BJP in the hope of, and it makes sense because the BJP doesn't have its own leadership. It doesn't have much. It didn't have much of an organization on the ground until recently. So it needs these important grassroots leaders in order to replenish and build its own organization on the ground. I think that is an important reason why it's spiriting away those like Mukul Roy and Suvendra Adhikari and so on.
Let me bring in Shikha Mukherjee. Ms. Mukherjee, thank you for joining us. Good evening to you. I want your comments and your point of view as well on what Radhika ji has just said about the BJP's larger game plan of saffronizing left domains like Bengal, and also what you're seeing on the ground in terms of the slogans, the communication, the pushback from the TMC. Is this likely, like we have seen other elections, is it likely now that the run-up to these elections will also be completely conversations about Hindus and Muslims, conversations about the communal divide that is in our country right now?
I think Radhika has done a marvelous job of giving the larger perspective, and it makes it easier as well as very much harder for me to then fill in the gaps from the bottom up, as it were. But let me give you a perspective of the BJP, and I think it's very amusing at this point. Today there is a poster up in Shantiniketan, being Vishwabharat, the location for Vishwabharati, Tagore's dream educational institution. And this poster is very intriguing. It's not by the BJP, but it's by a fringe group, which is obviously very saffron. It has Amit Shah's face on top and Tagore's face below. So in Bengal, where I may not be able to quote a single line of Tagore's poetry, but I nevertheless recognize Tagore as the greatest poet and the greatest intellectual that the world has ever seen. And therefore, Amit Shah superseding Tagore is causing an outrage. These are the problems of the BJP in West Bengal. They need to understand the place, the people, and the culture. And it's not that easy to do, because you can make a silly mistake like that, which would alienate a lot of people. But at this point in time, the BJP has made significant inroads, as it believes, and as is true. Now, it's not very clear to me whether it will actually get the 40% of the votes that it won in 2019, when it won 18 seats in the Lok Sabha elections. That is not very clear at all, because these are assembly elections where uh, where there are differences in the way in which the elections are conducted. The BJP is emerging, and on the basis of this 40%, the BJP has emerged as a challenge to the Trinamool Congress. And the left is certainly fighting with its back to the wall, because of the 294 seats that are up for grabs in 2021, the left at this point has less than 26. So the idea that West Bengal remains a left bastion is it's an existential moment for the left itself. Is it going to survive in the state? Is left-mindedness not going to become a sort of fringe idea, um, ardently admired uh, and followed by a few? Or is it going to mean a revival of the left? This is a point of crisis for the left itself. Therefore, the BJP um, is doing two things. One, as you said, the BJP is, as Radhika actually explained very clearly, that this is a template. BJP starts picking up people from other parties. The BJP in West Bengal has done that. But what it has also done is it has picked up left votes, which it did in 2019. So that becomes a kind of problem for the left on the one hand and the BJP's exhilaration on the other, that it is actually erasing the left from the grassroots, as it were. And therefore, if you look at the kind of violence that has happened in the last year and a half, it is violence between the BJP and the Trinamool Congress. There is no other. There are very few other clashes that are of any significance in this.
If I may ask you a question, Ms. Mukherjee, the idea of political violence in in Bengal, every time we read about it, it's shocking for the rest of us. But my understanding is that the people of Bengal have suddenly gotten used to it, because it used to be between the left and the TMC. It's now between the TMC and the BJP. Give us perspective on what this violence is really like on the ground. Also, the attack on JP Nadda's convoy, 2 days ago. What sort of sentiment does that bring up? Could you help us understand what political violence is like in Bengal?
Okay, let me sort of start with somewhere else. For people in Bengal, it is something that they know. They may not know it very well. They may not know the specifics, but they know this they know it in a very sort of deep-rooted way, which is that Swami Vivekananda an icon of the BJP. His brother was a man called Bhupendranath Datta, also an icon of Bengal. And who was Bhupendranath Datta? He was a terrorist with whom Swami Vivekananda had the best of relations. Who was Sri Aurobindo? Today, BJP is sort of picking up Sri Aurobindo as an icon of Bengal, and the symbol of Bengal's culture and spiritualism. Who was Sri Aurobindo before he became Sri Aurobindo? He was also a terrorist. So violence as a part of politics has been a core thing in West Bengal, in Bengal's history for a very long time. It has nothing to do with, there was this tradition of terrorism and militancy in Bengal as part of its politics for now well over 100 years. And this is something that, it's a dichotomy, it's a contradiction, but it exists. And this is something that you have to accept as being the normal in West Bengal, or Bengal as it was then and West Bengal now.
But could we argue, Ms. Mukherjee, that Bhupendranath Datta was a revolutionary, because at that time, the British were around.
So was the Congress. And the Congress did not believe in armed revolution. And that was where these groups that were formed in Bengal, Anushilon and Jugantar, and they were their core principle was that we have to arm ourselves and sacrifice blood and life to win independence. Independence is not going to come by dialogue and debate. Therefore, this is a core belief within Bengal. To get back to the violence part of it, yes, every regime change in Bengal has been preceded by an intensification of violence. It's not that the politics of Bengal is minus violence in normal times. There is violence, there are clashes, there is confrontation, but the intensity increases when a regime change seems to be the offing.
Okay, so if I were to clarify for our audience, if they're all getting confused right now, is that what you're saying is that there is a strain of violence in politics in Bengal. You're not necessarily equating, any sort of freedom struggle against the British with what is happening in Bengal right now.
No,
because
not
people are, we are an independent country with a sovereign government. We're not rebelling against that government.
It's just that we have to understand that the roots of violence in Bengal politics are very deep.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with whether that was pre-47 or this is post to 2010 or whatever, 2018. The point is that violence is an integral part of the way in which West Bengal conducts its politics.
Okay, taking this back to Radhika ji, just on the point of violence, and we're reading a lot about it. The BJP is making statements about it. Like I said, the attack on Mr. Nadda's, JP Nadda's convoy that happened a couple of days ago was also widely reported. What impact do you think this will make on the BJP's campaign?
Oh, okay. Now, we just have to see. So far, it doesn't seem to be a level playing field, at least from this distance. Maybe Shikha can clarify whether the BJP has been able to answer in kind on the ground. Doubtless it's state president, Dilip Ghosh. He tries to be very feisty, but often ends up saying making very inappropriate statements, politically incorrect kind of stuff. But whether the BJP has the workforce, the cadre to answer the Trinamool in kind, I don't know. In other words, are the BJP's karyakartas as well armed, as well equipped to fight on a terrain which is Mamta's at the moment? I mean, that remains to be seen, but I do think it's going to intensify. The BJP is not going to let go of it. It will answer, it will use all the state force at its command. You can already see that there is so much of tutu meme going on between the West Bengal government and the BJP on the deployment of police. And on that score, I think, Mr. Amit Shah is the Home Minister. He will have the upper hand. I don't think Mamta is going to be able to get her way at all. You can expect battalions from the center, and you can expect all kinds of other kind of, intimidatory tactics to try and, restrain Mamta and the Trinamool workers before the election. So it will be very interesting way to see in the coming days on what kind of shape this violence takes. On the one hand, you're going to have the state. On the other hand, you're going to have Trinamool workers who have enormous stakes in keeping Mamta going in this election, unless they kind of wear out by April or May. I don't know. But it will be very interesting because the BJP is also mobilizing its workers just about now. They're still sort of constituting some of their booth committees and so on. So I don't know if they have an army in that sense, or army of workers on the ground to the extent that the Trinamool has. But as Shikha said before the last Lok Sabha elections, not only the CPM votes, but this is what BJP guys told me, that a lot of the CPM cadre also migrated to the BJP to replenish its lack of organization on the ground. Now, are they going to help the BJP understand the geography, the terrain of the land better? Because, Mamta is right when she has a point when she talks about outsiders. BJP has deployed a plethora of outsiders in Bengal. Of course, those like Kailash Vijayvargiya and Sunil Deodhar have been working for a long time, and they probably understand the land better, the topography and the demography and the social composition and so on. But my own understanding would be that the BJP still has some way to go, and there probably Mamta has an upper hand if you're strictly talking about violence on the ground. But, when the days to come, as the presence of central forces increases, as the center augments the strength of central forces deployed on the ground, it will have an effect of intimidating Mamta. But she is a fighter and she's going to make a fight to the last. I can see that happening. She is not the kind who's going to give in, because the moment she even gives in a little, her sort of profile diminishes. Let's not forget she also has national ambitions in trying to sort of wrest Bengal for a third time. She has enormous stakes, which are not just confined to Bengal, but also at the national level. So, as far violence is a very important component of this election, and we just have to see whether the BJP is able to match Mamta in the days to come.
Okay, so I want to introduce another question to both of you. This one comes in from Aman Peshavri. He says, can Bengal be another Rajasthan or Odisha where the BJP makes inroads in the Lok Sabha but doesn't have the foothold for state elections? Because like you said, they seem like outsiders. So will the BJP, could that be a case where they're able to bring in a lot of, they're able to win the vote share in the Lok Sabha elections because the Prime Minister is such a strong campaign figurehead, but as far as the state elections is concerned, they might play out completely differently. Shikha Mukherjee, your answer first. Is that likely, or do you expect what we saw in 2019 to play out again in 2021?
That's the unpredictable part, because 40% votes in the state assembly means that the BJP is already in as the winner of of the 2021 elections, as it were, because the difference then between the BJP and the TMC would be a sub 3 to 4%. And given the fact that there is a new element which has been introduced into West Bengal elections by Owaisi and the mean, it would mean that there would be some reduction in the vote share of Muslim support to Mamata Banerjee. But let me sort of go back to a point that Radhika was making about CPM supporters having shifted to the TMC. What you're actually seeing is a whole, say about 12 TMC prominent MLAs and leaders shifting to the BJP, and they are bringing their cadres in as well. Therefore, the grassroots muscle that the BJP doesn't have on its own is also moving with the people who are shifting from the TMC to the BJP. That is something that needs to be taken into account. And therefore, the violence part of it means that the TMC will be, the TMC's aggression will be matched by the BJP's aggression from exactly the same sources.
Yes. Also, the same question to Radhika ji. The fact that we will see, and we've seen in the past, the central leadership of the BJP sort of parachute down into any local election as well, like it happened in Hyderabad, which everybody thought was surprising. Is that likely to play out here also? And will that make a difference to the state tally?
Well, it's already in play in Bengal. I mean, you have you have Amit Shah, you have JP Nadda, you have Kailash Vijayvargiya. I mean, you have a big team from the center, but this is a pattern that has been existing ever since Amit Shah became the BJP president. I mean, you saw it in Bihar in the 2015 election, and you've seen it in subsequent state elections, including Uttar Pradesh, until Yogi Adityanath rose and came on the scene. I mean, there was a question on Rajasthan and Odisha. Rajasthan is not a very appropriate example because the BJP has ruled Rajasthan in the past. Rajasthan swings between the BJP and the Congress. So the BJP has sort of state level strength, state level muscle, and the rest of it in Rajasthan. Odisha is a very good example. We have to see if the BJP is able to breach Naveen Patnaik's turf or not. I mean, it hasn't succeeded so far. Now, coming back to Bengal, yes, the state leadership is going to be very, very active in the days to come. I mean, you already see that Mr. Amit Shah is spending most of his time. He's on a visit from tomorrow to Midnapur. And the visits are going to be become more frequent in the days to come. So it's going to be a centrally managed election. And they are not going to leave it to the state leaders because, I mean, Shikha can correct me if I'm wrong. They have deliberately not allowed a state leader to come up, just like they did in Maharashtra before the last elections. I mean, Devendra Fadnavis was a post-poll development. It happened in Tripura as well. So this is a pattern which has been existing in the present regime. So, Dilip Ghosh is there to sort of espouse the hardline point of view, as it were. Then you have a more acceptable face and say someone like Babul Supriyo or Shopan Das Gupta or Anirban Ganguly. These are some of the people from the center, individuals from the center who have been traveling and trying to reach out to the Bhadralok, not Babul Supriyo, but Shopan Das Gupta and Anirban Ganguly. So it's a mixed bag of faces that the BJP has kind of put in play in West Bengal without committing itself to whether it is going to have a chief minister or not. In fact, in an interview, say last month or something, Amit Shah was asked about Bengal and whether he's going to project a chief ministerial candidate. He was totally non-committal, and my own information from the BJP is they will not.
Right.
They will allow everything to play, and in the end, I mean, they may pull a rabbit, or it may be from the existing lineup. I don't know what considerations will come into play in case they win the election.
Well, I must ask at this point about anti-incumbency towards the TMC that has now run the state for 10 years. How deep is that anti-incumbency? There are questions popping up on our chat window saying, does she please the minorities, and is that likely to hurt her? I think this is a reference to the appeasement accusation that Mamata Banerjee has received as well. So Shikha Mukherjee, you first. What is the level of anti-incumbency on the ground in Bengal towards Mamata Banerjee and the TMC?
Well, 10 years is a long time, and yes, there is anti-incumbency, which has, of course, been which is BJP's big campaign issue. That this is a cut money government. This is a corrupt government. This takes the money which we send down from the center and pockets it rather than spend it on the people. So, in anti-incumbency is part of the campaign. Anti-incumbency exists because there is simmering discontent in West Bengal about the way in which Mamata manages her party. But there is another thing which is happening here, which is that with more and more people leaving the Trinamool and joining the BJP, the number of people about whom there was a lot of discontent. Let me say, for instance, this guy from Asansol, Jitendra Tiwari, who's just quit. About him, even Babul Supriyo and the BJP women's cell head in Bengal, Agnimitra Paul, they said, we don't want him. He's not somebody that we are comfortable having around. Okay. And he shouldn't be here. So clearly the BJP, in its enthusiasm to rope in people from the other side, from the opposition, have roped in elements which are something probably rotten about them. So that is a problem that the BJP will have to sort out for itself. Yes. But what it actually means is that the Trinamool has got rid of people who would make the selection of MLAs a more problematic exercise for the party, because they would have claims, and their claims would be significant, whereas now they don't have to deal with the likes of Jitendra Tiwari and others, which could be that in pockets of West Bengal, the seething resentment against certain leaders has now shifted from the Trinamool to the BJP.
But I also want to bring in this perspective, Radhika ji, the idea of CAA and the implementation of it. Now, we know that there were protests after this was actually passed, but those protests were dismantled partly by government, partly by COVID, and now there's talk of it being implemented. What is the importance of CAA being implemented from the point of view of the West Bengal elections? How will it split the state? What impact will it have for both parties?
Well, obviously, the BJP is catering to a very specific audience, which is confined to certain regions bordering Bangladesh, who haven't probably got citizenship rights or and naturally voting rights so far. So to this group, this CAA probably holds out a lot of hope. But I don't know if it's such a big constituency. Maybe Shikha can elaborate on that. I really don't know how big. On the other hand, the more the BJP starts talking about implementing CAA, the greater the fears that will be stoked among the minorities. And probably this might cause them to rally around Mamata Banerjee much more than they might have been in the normal course of things, because Owaisi has already announced his entry into Bengal. But if the BJP sort of hammers on this whole CAA implementation plan, I'm sure it's going to make the minorities insecure. I don't see them accepting the whole thing with equanimity or anything of that sort. So that could help Mamta at least regroup her minority votes in a big way. Now, will that polarize the Hindus? I don't know. I mean, she has a Hindu following also. I don't think it's as sharply accentuated the Hindu Muslim divide as it's say in Uttar Pradesh. So, that I think flagging the CAA very aggressively at this point might help Mamta uh, and not the BJP to the extent that it's hoping for.
All right. There are, of course, other parties as well. And I want to remind our audience, I believe that the population split for Muslims in Bengal is about 20%. But the other parties, the left, the Congress, Nitish Kumar's JDU now throwing his hat in the ring, saying that he wants to contest about 75 states, and OAC's MIM and what that would mean. What role are these parties likely to play? Kanishk Singh asks us, will the left make a resurgence in 2021? I mean, just the eye roll that Radhika ji gave us should be your answer, really. But Shikha Mukherjee, the left, the Congress, the JDU, and the MIM, what role are they likely to play in these elections?
Well, the left and the Congress and Alliance is trying to make a resurgence. As I said, the left is fighting with its back to the wall, so is the Congress for it. Both are fighting for their survival in the state. Will that mean that they have a better organized effort to try and dislodge some Trinamool MLAs, recapture certain amount of space? That is something which needs to be seen, because as of now, it's very difficult to assess what exactly the left Congress alliance is going to achieve. It's a complex exercise because the left and the Congress have almost reached an alliance in 2019, but then that failed. It's something that remains to be seen. But insofar as Owaisi Muslim appeasement by Mamta Banerjee and the BJP's polarization politics and CAA, they're all part of the same chain. And for different reasons. One is that when the BJP talks CAA NRC, it is not simply appealing to the number of voters or number of people who may not be citizens as yet of India. It also creates the fear, because the CAA NRC is very clear, it excludes Muslims. And because of that, it creates the fear, as it has done in Assam. Assam is a chaos. Who will get included? How will they prove their citizenship, etc., etc. So it is working as a part of the polarization politics of the BJP. And it's just not simply a bureaucratic problem that can be easily solved. It is also a kind of psychological pressure on every Muslim who will have to then prove his or her identity.
Right. So obviously Assam is also Assam is also going into elections next year. So will that hurt the BJP more in Assam? Are they willing to sacrifice Assam for the gains that they may make in Bengal?
I mean, I don't understand that question at all.
If
I can come in on Assam.
Please.
Yeah. I mean, when the BJP started making a big noise about, and it was actually implemented in parts of Assam, I spoke to some of the BJP's MPs from the upper Assam region, And they were very unhappy about it. Why? Because they feared that there would be a sudden influx of Hindus from Bangladesh. By the way, that's not happened. I mean, why on earth would they continue coming to India? I mean, they are migrating to Europe and other countries now. India is a very poor cousin. So they feared that there would be an influx and they would settle in the Brahmaputra Valley. So far, they've been confined to lower Assam or the Barak Valley and encroach upon their land, upon their jobs, upon trade, upon
Yeah, and
commerce, and
really
so
the
on.
time was
You know? There
unproductive.
was a lot of fear among those Ahom MPs from Upper Assam. So, if so, the BJP's whole CAA strategy in Assam, as in Bengal, is intended to polarize the population, but it still has a lot of convincing to do among the Assamese-speaking people. That is why the new theme that the BJP is playing upon is culture, a cultural war between the Assamese and what it calls the Mia culture. It is something that, it has latched onto Mia poetry, Mia literature, Mia whatever. So it is a Hindu-Muslim divide that the BJP is trying to force. Whether it succeeds in Assam, I'm not very sure.
Shikha Mukherjee, let me rephrase the question. My point was, as Kailash Vijayvargiya said, that he's hopeful the CAA will be implemented fairly soon. Is it likely to hurt the BJP more in Assam if they're doing it with their eye on West Bengal?
You know, CAA in Assam is far more complicated than Radhika said, and this is something on which I will strongly disagree with her. Some of the districts which are very Mia dominated are very much in Upper Assam, and they're very much in the Brahmaputra Valley, especially districts like Nagaon, which is from where this Ajmal is an MP. And whether the CAA has made the people of Assam not only divided on Hindu-Muslim lines, but also on the lines of who is an Assamese. This is also this is something that very few people want to talk about because it's very sensitive, given the Ahom Gana Parishad movement way back in the 80s, and Alpha as well. The fact is that the CAA NRC is also questioning the identity and residence of large numbers of Bengalis who are also Hindus or Buddhists in Assam, because citizenship has to be proved. And this is exactly why the BJP is uncomfortable having done it. How it is going to retrieve ground, I don't know. But in Assam, till about 8-9 months ago, when the CAA NRC thing was at its peak, things were very bad.
All right.
Back to West Bengal on CAA NRC, it is Hindu-Muslim polarization. It's what the BJP is talking about constantly is the citizenship rights of a particular community. It's focusing on that, the Matwa community, which is by in the caste hierarchy, it comes right at the bottom, and it is talking about people like them who came across the border and settled down and who don't have proper identification citizenship papers. The numbers are probably quite small because most of them of the Matwas who are there in West Bengal are very well settled. They're very well settled. They are there are ministers, there are MPs, there are MLAs who are Matwas, and therefore there really isn't very much to be said about how precarious is that existence. But the CA NRC does raise the bogey of who is an Indian.
Right.
And West Bengal, if I'll just go through a couple of facts, which is that Murshidabad has a 66.2% Muslim population. Malda 51%, Uttar Dinajpur 50%. Howrah, which is right next to Calcutta, has a 26% Muslim population. And therefore, this politics of the CA, NRC, Kailash Vijayvargiya, JP Nadda, Amit, Shah, all of them declaring that we are going to implement the CA, NRC very, very soon, before the elections, in fact, is not only polarizing, but it is also creating the ground conditions for a confrontation where Mamata will certainly step in, so will the left, so will the Congress.
Right.
And there will be a fight on the ground, and there will be protests, which will again, in some ways, work to polarize the situation. And then, as I was saying, there is a continuum to Owaisi. Therefore, what is Owaisi's presence in West Bengal? Owaisi's presence in West Bengal is a declaration that these secular parties, Trinamool, Congress, and the left, are no longer sufficient to represent this beleaguered Muslims of the state.
Right. I'm going to leave it there, Ms. Mukherjee and Mrs. Ramaseshan. Thank you so much for joining us. This is obviously the first of what will be many, many conversations that we're going to have about Bengal, because this is going to only get hotter. The accusations are only going to fly faster between the two camps. And undoubtedly, all national leaders are going to show up in Bengal and make this perhaps the biggest campaign that we've seen among the states. It's likely to also be far more communal on all sides, in accusations and in responses. What you can rely on, or what I can promise you, is calm conversations here where nobody's yelling over anybody else and you can actually hear the arguments. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything the panelists say. The idea is to listen and then form opinions of your own. So thank you so much to our panelists for being so patient and answering our questions. We hope that we can continue having these conversations in the future. For our audience, thank you for joining us. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.